I think we'll take this as like the official starting point. um,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
so
sure.
you run the Discord channel, you own it. You are a fearless leader that has brought everyone together. So for those of us who don't know who you are and your background, can you give us maybe a little more insight to you know where you came from, how you got to the decision to make the switch, and then what you're doing now?
Sure. I'll start with well, my name is Victor. I'll start with my age because I feel like that's a common thinking
Concern.
point for most people. Yeah, concern. It's like, am I too old for this or am I too young? Whatever it is. I'm 34. I
I
am
wanted to
a
push it
physical
day over
therapist.
28.
I'm a physical therapist, and I've been a physical therapist for about 5 years or so. I work in an inpatient setting, so in the hospital, and I have really no tech background prior to this. I may have taken some college level courses in like, let's say, calculus 1 and 2, physics 1 and 2, but nothing that's overly computer science or tech related. I may have taken one statistics class, but that was like a decade ago. So I don't think I have tons of background. I started studying this year, about January. Um, and so that means that I'm about almost 11 months in to my studying. And I've been studying while working full time, for the most part. I've been taking vacation time to study. I've been studying my off hours. I've been studying while waiting between patients sometimes. And then I joined a boot camp in June of this year. And I did a lot of research before I joined that boot camp. I It is expensive. So I don't think it's a good choice for everybody, but I felt like it was a faster choice.
Right.
And time is money because when you are not working and you're studying and you're extending how long you're studying by like prepping for like 6 months, that's a lot of lost income that you could have made. Um, so that kind of influenced my choice. Plus the outcomes. You have more of a Codesmith like publishes their outcomes. So that gave me, and they're independently audited. So that gave me a bit more um, confidence in my choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's there's a lot I think to unpack there, which is some of the questions I'm sure people coming into this are going to be asking, right? How long do I need to be, or how much do I need to be putting into this?
Mhm.
Where do I start? The decision between doing self-taught versus boot camp. Can I
Yeah.
even do this while working full time? Um,
Yeah.
and just to give this more of a rounded context, I'll give a little bit about my background and where I am and what I'm doing. And
Hmm.
just to kind of frame this whole conversation, Victor and I are going to be talking about the difference between going the self-taught route versus going the boot camp route. So we're both. I'm not going to say necessarily other ends of the camps because I want this to be more of like a discussion about what the benefits of one and the pros and cons of one versus the other. Um, but I went the self-taught route. So I graduated in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. My last externship was actually cut short um, because of the pandemic. But luckily, I had enough hours, so I graduated, and then I started job hunting right when everyone was not hiring. So there's a little bit of a panic there, but I landed at a outpatient ortho clinic and started working full time, and I was like, this is actually terrible.
Oh
I
wow.
wasn't having a good time with it.
Yeah.
Which uh, lended me to start looking at other options, what I could do. I also didn't have a tech background prior to starting the career switch. I mean, the most I think techie thing I did was in college um, our labs, is I would write Excel programs to kind of like calculate, you know, you know what I mean, to like you
Yeah.
punch in the
Yeah. I
variables and
remember that.
yeah, so that's like the
Yeah.
most tech thing I ever did.
Mhm.
And I landed on the decision to do the self-taught route mainly because my wife was pregnant at the time. We didn't have the money to spend on a program,
Mhm.
and we also didn't have I didn't have the time to not be working, right, and then doing um, a boot camp. So I started almost as soon as I started working in 2020. I started studying self-taught. Um, I just went and found a bunch of free resources online, and it took about 2 years of on and off studying before I'll say I'm not even confident that I was good enough to be applying for jobs, but I started applying for jobs after 2 years and then landed a job at a company as a
Hmm.
software engineer. So
Hmm.
going back to what Victor had said, you talked about the amount of time that you were dedicating to studying, and this is
Yeah.
before you even got into the boot camp. So,
Yes.
can you tell us, maybe some of the your approach, I suppose, because that might be a question that people have
Sure.
is, when do I know this is right
Yeah.
for me?
Yeah. I think it's such a personal decision. So I started, what inspired me to start was my friend who was in a different field. He was a chef and he did a boot camp. One of like the more common ones that it's called General Assembly. He did one of those and he basically became a software engineer afterwards, but he had like an unparalleled work ethic and he became very successful. I started looking into myself. The first thing I did was I went to a boot camp's website and I did some of their pre-work.
Mm,
I found their onboarding work to be pretty good because when you're first starting out, there's so much resources like free code camp. I did Odin. I did a lot of Odin project, and I think after doing the boot camp prep work, which was about 100 hours worth, I was liking it. I was like liking it. I was like, oh yeah, this is like almost fun. I kept telling everyone. I talked to anyone that I knew that was remotely in tech, and or even not, and I would send them my projects, things I've made and stuff. And then I fell into Odin project, and that was probably when I knew I was serious about it. The first 100 hours were like, whatever. When I started doing Odin project, I was like, I could see myself doing this as a job or just like, spending a lot of time doing it. I enjoyed every aspect of it. The least enjoyable aspect was probably reading tons of documentation,
yeah.
but it was a little boring. I had to use like techniques like Pomodoro. I would highly recommend that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Uh, you know, yeah, X amount of time on, 5 minutes or 10 minutes forced break, and then back on, and then you keep cycling that, and that was really effective for me. It got me through a lot of stuff. And then I probably did a total of 400 hours before I went to Codesmith. And Codesmith has its own prep work, which is more intense. They go deep into JavaScript. They expect you to learn things like closure or recursion, higher order functions, async, um, object-oriented programming. These are all topics that they expect for you to learn before entry into the program. And they have like a technical interview as well as a non-technical interview. The technical interview I actually had to go through 2 rounds. Um, and they're done by typically former Codesmith graduates that come back and help out in some way. And that was you're basically training algos all day. And I prepped for like about a month, and I found a community in the Codesmith. They have like it's called CSX. It's like a huge Slack with like maybe 10,000 people or more. And I found like study groups there, and that's when had my first. Okay, so this is my first entry into like coding with other people. We would have study groups where we're live coding in front of each other. We're like doing technical discussions, whiteboarding, like all that stuff was new to me. And that was the first time kind of I got motivated by other people that were coding at the same time as me, like collaborative coding. We would work through problems together. So that I found that really motivating, and I studied harder than ever at that point in time. I would be working full time, and there was times when I studied for 40 hours that week, which was kind of insane. Honestly, it wasn't that sustainable. And I did feel a little burnt out after I got into Codesmith after doing all that prep. So, in hindsight, I probably wouldn't have done it in that way.
Right.
But at that point, like I definitely knew I was going to do it. And I also struggled with like the debate between self-taught or why pay someone when even now I feel everything I learned I could have learned on my own.
Right.
The difference is that it feels a little bit like a fraternity in the way, like you're almost like paying or like you're enrolling in this group that kind of has your back no matter what, essentially. You don't really have to have it, but the moral support is really critical in a lot of ways because I didn't really understand how emotional the process would be.
Right.
You frequently feel either you it's like being bipolar. You like bounce between
I'm a
feeling on top of the world.
I'm a genius, and then why? And that's just so hard.
Yeah, on the same day, and then you're like, I'm an idiot. I can't do it. I'm gonna get laughed out of the industry even trying
Right.
because I just can't do this. And then some days you think you just have it. You like nail it. I'm ready. Look at me. I can do anything.
Right.
So it's just it's a lot of ups and downs, and I would have never thought coding was so emotional of a process.
Yeah.
You think it's just some guy sitting on a computer going like, oh yeah, here's some punching some words in and feeling, oh yeah, okay, it's good, and just continue. But it's really you're going through so many like mental up and downs.
Yeah.
Um, it's quite intense in some ways. So yeah, that's kind of how I. So basically, long answer. The short answer to all that would be, I think I knew I could. I was definitely going to do it when I found myself just innately attracted to the type of work,
Right.
and also the community. Like once I started dealing with people and making my coding friends, I started making coding friends. That opened a whole new world where I just felt like kind of like I could do this and it was fun and I belonged here. Like
Right. It's
a lot of people have that sense of it's not my world.
where do I fit in, and do I fit in?
Exactly,
And I think there's
exactly. But there's a huge community for it.
yeah, and that's there's a lot of good things that you brought up, and to going back to this whole framing of right of going into a boot camp. So one of the things you did before you even considered going into a boot camp is you did prep for a boot camp, not the one you ended up with, but
Yep,
do I even like this and can I do it? Is kind of where you started.
yep, yep.
It sounds like you also went and did the Odin project, for which those of you who don't know is it's a free resource online that helps you start out with coding. I think an analogous one is Free Code Camp.
Mhm.
So just different flavors of the same thing. It's just a resource out there that you can start learning to code. So what Victor did is really he immersed himself and decided this is for me. I do like this, and then he decided to take the next steps of well, let's see what it takes to get into this boot camp, and then went that route. And frankly, what it takes to get into the boot camp, it almost sounds like you're doing a job interview in and of itself. The amount of data structures and
It
algorithms you have to do.
a little bit. I think it's almost like a baby. It's essentially like a baby interview process. I think that they try to model their program. It's a practical program, right? It's the diff. So I think one big thing for people to that I hope they understand is that a boot camp is not like any program you've been to if you're familiar with like the academic world, like going to college or taking grad school courses, whatever. It's not the same type of methodology. Like you're getting lots of background and then you have a few practical assignments. The boot camp is going to be very, 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 very densely packed information. They're going to teach you like a huge topic like databases in like an hour or two. And then they're just going to set you loose on this unit and they're just going to say go. So there's not as much teaching per se as you would think there is. They give you enough. That's
Right.
what I feel. They give you enough to have a general idea, and then really what your knowledge is how much you really grit your teeth and dig in and just push really hard and try to use every resource you possibly can, including people, one another.
Yeah.
Um,
I think an important piece
it,
in there too
mhm.
to kind of tease out just a little more is that a lot of the times my struggles and everyone's struggles when they're learning this stuff is not even knowing that the thing exists that is the answer to your solution. So it sounds like what the boot camp does is although it doesn't dive deep and you might listeners right now might be thinking, well, why the hell would I pay money if they're not going to explain it to me? Even them just kind of bringing it up and saying like this is something that's out there, you're going to have to do the research on your own if you want to get this information. Even just that exposure is good. because sometimes just knowing it exists is all you need to be able to go and find and where it fits in the grand scheme of things.
Yes, I kind of liken it a lot to like planting, like farming or something. They're planting all these seeds all over the place, and over time, that's when they start developing. But in the beginning, you might get the idea, you might get a lecture, and you totally don't understand it, and you think, okay, what was the point of that? I don't get it, or is that
Yep.
I didn't do a good job understanding that. They didn't do a good job teaching me, and then come forth like a couple months later, and you're working on a project, and suddenly it clicks.
Oh, that's why they brought that up.
Yeah, you like there's been moments in time in the boot camp where I'm like, I feel like they could have taught this better. And then sometimes I think, wow, this program is it's unbelievable amount of like preparation, the way they've organized this unit, this concept, whatever. It makes it the timing is just perfect. So sometimes like you kind of go back and forth to like disagreeing and then you're like, oh wait, it worked out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like comments in the boot camp like, oh, drink the Kool-Aid and trust the process. And there is some of that. You have to essentially when you selected the boot camp, you hopefully did your research and you believe that they know what they're doing. That
Right.
does work.
And that makes sense. And I think another question too that people might be asking themselves, coming from the medical field into tech is, and something you brought up before we started recording this was our base of knowledge and our education is in something completely different, and there's not typically a lot of overlap in our courses and education with tech.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but I would say if you are in the medical field and you've been working, you are more than smart enough to be able to learn this material. You have
Yep.
a
Yep.
lot of good study foundation. I mean, you know how you learn. At
Mhm.
this point, right? As PTs,
Yep.
we have doctorates. You know what works best for you. You have likely figured out how to ingest a lot of information and map
Yep.
it to something very applicable. So I would say
Mhm.
to assuage that concern, if you're worried about not being smart enough, you totally are. It just takes time. And Victor, before we started recording this, you actually brought up a good point that I think is worth reiterating, which is the amount of time you think that you need to dedicate towards this. Do you want to maybe go
Yeah.
into that a little bit?
Yeah. I think I came with this number based on what I've seen people say, what I've seen people say in terms of self-taught routes, like how many hours did they spend per week before they got a job? I did the math, you multiply it, how much time people spend in a boot camp, prepping for the boot camp, you do the math, how much time it takes for them to get their job, you do that math. It's always around 1,500 hours, 2,000 hours. And I think that kind of lends itself to be for you to be an entry level developer. For someone, and then you think about what they call a mid or senior developer, and it's like 5 years worth. But if you
Right.
do 5 times 2,000 hours, it's 10,000, which is like kind of Malcolm Gladwell's like he's like an author. He talks about what it takes to be an expert, and he always mentions 10,000 hours, and that's 5 years work. So I think no matter I feel like sometimes the skill acquisition, I feel is kind of it doesn't matter what the skill is, right? In the end, it's a skill that you develop and it takes practice. Same tasks, same abilities that make you learn one thing, same it helps you with that thing. So 5 years of like, pure dedication to playing the guitar, and 5 years later, you're pretty good. 2,000 hours later, you're a novice player. You can play, but you're not excellent, but you can play. So the same thing goes for, software development, physical therapy, like anything. Like 5 years as a therapist, and you're
You're
pretty good.
you're probably a pretty good therapist. Yeah.
Yeah. So 1 year in, that's when you kind of start. Okay, I can do my stuff. So I think 1,500 is. I personally I'm at about 1,000 hours, 1,080 maybe, and I probably put in about 30 hours a week on average. So it's 20 hours with boot camp, 10 hours outside, mostly covering the concepts that were talked about, or actually mostly algos, data
which
structure
is
algorithms.
which is good. That's what you need to land the interview or to pass the interview in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the advice I got from people in my program that had finished. like the fellows. A lot of the fellows are basically TAs that are Codesmith graduates that come back to help teach and proctor some stuff. And most of their advice was make sure you, if you have extra time, work on like technical like interview skills.
Right, which is good. And I think that's so important because okay, so now, kind of pairing that to the self-taught route. So you have um, on Victor's route going towards the boot camp. There's a lot of prep work. He did a lot of is this even right for me before he dove in and did his research on the boot
Yeah.
camp. Um,
Hmm.
and I think to mirror that on the self-taught route, um, one of the pieces, the fundamental pieces that you're missing with the self-taught is that sense of community. Which is why I'm so excited that this Discord channel exists because when I first started, I didn't have anyone, and I had some friends that are in the who are in tech. Um, but even when they were helping me, it's like their level was so far beyond mine that even them trying to explain simple things, it was like there's still 5 degrees of separation between what they were saying and where I was at. So
Hmm.
um, the piece that's missing, I think, on the self-taught route is that sense of community, that sense of someone having your back. Uh, and again, why I think this Discord channel is so important is because you can get that. There are a lot of people who are there to help you in that Discord channel. Part of the reason why I want to do all these videos is because I wish someone would have been here to do this for me when I started. So, um,
Sure.
but going back to the path, so mine was a little different in the sense that I wasn't like hammering out 20, 30 hours a week. I took about 2 years before I made the transition, but as I said, my wife was pregnant. I had just started a new job, and then we'd moved. We had our daughter, so you know, there were some weeks where I was putting in like 20, 30 hours, and then like none for a month, and then 20, 30 hours. So there was a lot of ups and downs. Um,
Yeah.
and part of it, I think, goes back to the fact that I didn't have obligation to anyone, right? It was just myself that I was obligated to. So that would have been, I think, in hindsight, faster had I joined a boot camp, because there would have been that like, hey, you have to show up. Um,
Hmm.
so if you're considering going the self-taught route versus the boot camp route, I think it's really important to have that um, understanding of, can I motivate myself enough to do this? Because if you're someone who needs someone kind of pushing them forward, I think a boot camp is a great answer. Um, if you're someone who can stay dedicated and can set time out of their schedule to study, I also think that's a completely valid way. It's just knowing yourself and where I think what method works best for you. If you're looking for like I want to switch now, I think the boot camp is going to be the faster way. I think it's going to take longer going the self-taught way because um, like Victor was saying, they're really prepping you for the interview, right? They're really kind of getting you ready for the data structures and algorithms. And as a
Hmm.
self-taught, I haven't really done much of data structures and algorithms. I just worked on projects and was very fortunate in that my projects, I think, aligned with what a company was looking for. Um, and my technical screen was not so much having to do, it wasn't so much having to do any like coding challenge. It was more just like talking about my projects, talking about what I knew. Do I understand like the basics of a language? Things like that. So it is, I'd say, possible to land a job, but I wouldn't also say, and when I say possible to land a job, going self-taught route, it is possible to land a job and not um, have like the in-depth knowledge of the data structures and algorithms. Although I will say that it's better to have that because you're going to have more opportunities. I think I was just in the right place at the right time. Um, so yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, self-taught versus.
I think so. I like to say that all software engineers are self-taught,
Yeah, that's a good point.
um, because the more I talk to people, even okay, even the whole mythical, not mythical, but like amazing, we hold it on a huge pedestal, right? Like the comp sci degree, right? Okay, you came out with a computer science degree, blah blah blah. Even the people with a degree that I've talked to, they talk about how little the degree itself and the coursework has prepared them for the job itself, in
Right.
particularly software development. A huge amount of the degree is on a lot of different academic and science research subjects, mathematic related things that are not really applicable if you're like a full stack developer. It just doesn't. And what a lot of them have to do is they end up doing huge amounts of self-studying on their own. Now they have a foundation. That's the thing. That's in computer science, so they can build off of that. But and then they're still self-studying. Same with like the spectrum of how people end up in the boot camp is very wide. You can have someone that barely passes muster, and you can have someone that's amazing. Um, and a lot of it has to do with how much work you're putting in. And some people do have like a certain aptitude. They learn the same topic faster than someone else in a given amount of time.
Right.
That's might be out of your control. But if you can make progress and time is the other exponent, is the other factor, right? Then hypothetically, it's just a function of time. It's a function of time you put into it. So that's why I believe in putting in extra time outside of boot camp. I don't think doing the bare minimum will serve most people well.
Right.
Um, I think, I mean, at this, okay, so for example, my capstone project, which I just started, is on GraphQL and Next.js. It's going to be a GraphQL API endpoint tester with some security related features like penetration testing and things like that. These are not topics that we had a single day of lecture on at any point in the bootcamp. And that's kind of what they want. They tell you, okay, we got you started. You learned how to learn. You learn how to work with a team. You learn how to self-organize. Go. Go do something that we have not taught you at all with any technology you feel like. It doesn't even matter. One thing that they ask is don't do it in a new language.
Right.
Keep it in JavaScript, which is what my bootcamp is about. Um, and focus on something hard. Like try to solve that what they call the 20% problem, which the 2080 rule,
Right.
which everyone always loves to talk about, which I only heard about like maybe like a month ago, but it is a common thing that people bring up. Where it's like maybe you could probably go more on what that is, but my understanding is there's a couple interpretations. 20% of the engineers in a company do 80% of the work. That's one topic. Another one is like on a project or a problem, the last 20% of that problem, when you've completed 80%, that last 20% of that problem is what takes 80% of the time.
Yeah.
Because it's just that extra finishing bit of business that's tough, like edge cases or
Right.
like unforeseen like consequences or things like that.
Right.
So that's kind of the focus of the capstone project. They want you to be more than just, I guess, a code monkey. They want you to try to use your noodle and try to think about things from an engineering perspective. They think that's where the value of an engineer is.
And
You solving a tough problem.
I can mirror that on the software engineering side. When I first got to this company that I'm working at now, that was one of the first things they gave me was here's this problem. Um, we have no idea how to solve it. Can you figure it out? And it was just that. And it's like, okay. And it was the first time I've ever looked at something where there's absolutely no material on it online, right? Like most of the time when we're learning how to code, you can look, okay, but what is this function? What does it do? What's this
Yep.
technology? There's the first time I found something, there's absolutely nothing on it. And
Yep.
so what Victor's kind of talking about here, what they're having him do in the boot camp is very analogous to what you're going to likely end up doing at whatever job that you end up at, which is you're creating a solution from nothing. So which is cool. That ability to do that is actually a very good skill to have. Um, and then the point that he was talking about too, that's Tim Ferriss, the 80-20 rule. You'll get 80% of the results with 20% of the work, and vice versa, right? So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, that I think that's a great skill that they're imparting on you. That's something I didn't necessarily get exposure to until I started working. So again, just another example of how boot camps can actually give you a leg up.
Yeah, I would say that on the self-taught route, I felt Odin did a very good job of doing this too. Because Odin often has you start with, they give you literally, sometimes they give you nothing but like 5 sentences and they just say go. And you don't get boilerplate. I'm a huge fan of using your own IDE, your own editor. and building actual projects and deploying them, on GitHub. Everything should be on GitHub, so you can show your projects to people, show your code to people, demo it, and that's how you kind of meet your friends and be part of the community is get your stuff out there immediately. Like even if it's like something super simple, just start looking at your code, looking at other people's code. Odin project is great because I'm like a shell for Odin project. Um, there's so many people doing the same project. Like, okay, you did rock, paper, scissors, or you did you know, the tic tac toe or whatever it was. You can look at other people's code and everyone puts their own flair to it. Everyone does it in their style. And you can learn a lot from just reading other people's code. That's the benefit, I think, of having a community. But you can get that outside of a boot camp too, even as a self-taught. It's
Yeah,
just harder
it is harder.
to have people, they're not on the same pace as you. You're going to be at one point, someone else is going to be at another point. So you're always constantly trying to find people that are like kind of doing the same thing you're doing or at the same level. They could be like, oh yeah, I'm doing Odin, but I have like 5 years of background doing Java
Right.
and I'm just doing this to learn, and then their knowledge maybe kind of their advice may be hard to apply because they're at a different level. They come with base understanding. So I think that's kind of where a boot camp offers something to you. It does serve some things up on a platter, but in the end, I think the blood, sweat, and tears are all still yours.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The ethic and the work ethic still has to be there. It's still going to be a big part of it. Um, to
Yeah.
go- to go on the Odin project, I was on the other end of the spectrum where I wanted someone to hold my hand through the whole thing. So I didn't.
Mhm.
When I first started learning how to code, I didn't necessarily like have the confidence in what I could do to go out and try to research things on my own and figure things out. So I did
Yep.
free code camp, which was very handholdy. The IDE is within the browser, and it's
Mhm.
like, this is a string. Can you print the string? It's like you step by step. It walks you through how to do it. And of course, too, there's
Mhm.
tons of YouTube videos on people who have already done the same. If you get stuck on something, for example, I got stuck
Yep.
on a lot of the React. There's a React component, which is a front end framework. So I ended up watching tons of YouTube videos on React for free code camp that kind of explain how to go through this whole process. So um, no, no necessarily wrong way to do it. I think what we're ultimately both kind of getting at here is that you just need to do it. There has to be, you just have to do it. That's the thing.
Yep.
So
Yep.
framing this to kind of tie things up, if someone, uh, let's say, to those of you who are listening, your question is probably somewhere around the ballpark of, is this right for me? Should I do it? And how do I do it? Um, Can you maybe give them some resources that you think? I mean, there's tons in the Discord channel, but maybe
Yeah.
like a good place how you started. It sounded like you went to the boot camp, not
Yep.
not the one you ended up going to ultimately, but you did like their challenges. That's a
Yep.
good place to start. Would you recommend that for someone else?
I would say pick the resource that seems the most interesting and fun, and just stick with it. Don't don't look at the hundreds of resources out there and feel like, oh, which one? You're at the candy store and you can only pick one.
Yeah,
Um, you know, that's time and effort in itself, and you're just psyching yourself out. You don't even know if you even like it. Just pick the one that is the most accessible to you. It could be a boot camp's prep work. It could be free code camp is a good one. Odin project. You can do anything. I even did the ones on the phone. There was this one called Grasshopper
oh, I did
or
that one too
something.
for a little while. That's funny.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. The main thing is I personally think it should be fun. I had a lot of fun investigating it. I still look at coding and all that with a sense of wonderment about how amazing it is. So I think pick one, whatever you, or pick a couple, you can bounce around, but just do it. Just put in the time. You're not going to know if you like it or if it's for you if you haven't done it. It's like, can you imagine, would you like to be an astronaut? You're not going to know what it is unless you've done some of the training or done some talk to people. Like if you know anyone that having a mentor is great. But I would say there are some things that are very specific to programming in general that I think you need to be comfortable with. And then one of those is like imagining concepts in your head, like a mental model. Developing mental models are super important. You can draw them out instead, but you do need to kind of like uh, put it into your mind how something works.
Yeah.
Turning complex things into simple things, I think, is a very good skill. Or and then simple things can be more complicated as well, right? Adding complicate complexity to something. Um, I think math ability, you don't really need a ton per se, but I do think it helps because you're once again you're dealing with abstractions, things that don't really exist that you have a function and then you're keeping track of it. All that stuff is useful. And then I'd say being persistent or stubborn is essential. You cannot give up. You
Yes.
cannot do not go look for the walkthrough right away. The grind where you're pushing through a problem, a blocker, and you've solved it and you feel like you're genius or whatever you feel is I think that one of the most the eureka moments you have is like one of the most rewarding moments you can possibly have when you solve your own problem
Yeah. It keeps us coming
after
back.
battling it. Yes, it's like the stronger the block, you just wake up thinking about it. It that I think being comfortable with fighting through difficulty is super important, and also having that like just knowing how to emotionally manage yourself, like regulate yourself a little bit is important too, because there's gonna be times where you're like super frustrated or upset, and you need to know how to take a break,
Yeah.
not burn yourself out. You need to learn how to not also compare yourself too much with other people
That's a big one. Yeah, because there's always gonna be
because
someone who can do what you're doing in, like, a one-line solution that's super elegant, and you might feel discouraged, but
yeah, whether they come from like a base of knowledge perspective, like they just have a lot more information than you or practice, or if it's even someone that's just very adept at picking things up. Like one of the strongest people in my current bootcamp cohort is a teacher with zero background. And she just picks stuff up really fast, and she also has an insane work ethic. Like she puts a lot of time on it.
right.
So if you compare yourself to other people all the time, it's easy to feel down. Also, the flip side, if you feel prideful and if you think of yourself as, oh, like I learned this better than anyone, I'm faster than anyone, that's gonna come to bite you in the butt
Right, when you get
because
stuck on something, right?
yeah, when you get stuck on something or someone outshines you, your ego becomes very frail.
Yeah.
So I think developing grit and resilience is kind of one of the most important things, I think, for longevity.
Yeah, I would agree to that. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it sounds like if I can, repeat what you're saying, just being centered, not getting discouraged, but also not, having an ego about it too, because it is, yeah, the whole experience of coding is definitely. We could probably spend a whole discussion just talking about
I think so.
the highs and the lows of being
Yeah.
being able to solve problems. But yeah, so I think there's a
Mm.
lot of good pieces in here to take away. I know that I've said this multiple times, and I'll say it again. I'm definitely a resource. If anyone has any questions and they want to reach out to me, more than happy to answer them. You can do it on through the Discord or through LinkedIn. That's totally fine. I know Victor's incredibly active in the channel. So hats off to you. And I'm sure he is the exact same way. If you have questions, you can reach out to him.
Totally.
Do you have any closing thoughts? Any?
Closing thoughts is it's totally possible. I've seen it happen again and again. I also met therapists in the wild, including yourself,
Yeah.
um, that are out there and doing it. I think one thing that I like to focus on for closing thoughts is like your prior experience helps. Even if it's not technical, your ability to communicate with other people, work in a professional setting, a team-based setting, you're studying, where you're digesting tons of information and you're distilling it into a frame. A lot of the medical field is about frameworks, mental models. So apply that, the human system, all the systems that we learned about. You can think of that. You can kind of apply that same type of concept to a lot of things you're learning in terms of the web or languages or computers or what's this framework do or how does a user interact with something. It's the same type of stuff that you can apply. So use what you got, and I think finding mentorship and community is essential to self development. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and to kind of mirror that, I think this Discord channel is a great place to find that. Whether you're doing the self-taught route or if you're going through a boot camp, having people to lean on is definitely helpful. There's something to be said about trying to grind through, like Victor was saying, trying to solve something on your own before reaching out for help. But there is, I think, a balance between doing it on your
Yes.
own, and it's not always easy to know when it's right to do one versus the other. But certainly trying, right? The
Yes.
the big takeaways I have are whatever you decide to do, to stick through with it. Keep doing it. It's not going to happen overnight. Um, it's going to be hard. You're gonna be emotionally frustrated. It's gonna happen, and just
Mhm.
being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Um, that's a skill I think that's important to develop for this. And then of course, reaching out when you need assistance. But I'll try to keep putting out videos like this. I've reached out to a couple of recruiters to see if maybe I can do an interview with them and get a concept of what they're looking for when they're sitting across the table from you. So keep an eye out for that
Mhm.
video. But other than that, it's been a pleasure, and we'll keep putting out this content.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for your time. Appreciate getting the chance to talk.